oruguitas enamoradas pasan sus noches y madrugadas llenas de hambre, siguen andando y navegando un mundo que cambia y sigue cambiando, navegando un mundo que cambia y sigue cambiando. Dos oruguitas paran el viento mientras se abrazan con sentimiento, siguen creciendo, no saben cuándo buscar algún rincón. El tiempo sigue cambiando, inseparables son, el tiempo sigue cambiando. Ay, oruguitas, no se aguanten más, hay que crecer, aparte y volver, hacia adelante seguirás, vienen milagros, vienen crisalidas, hay que partir y construir su propio futuro. Ay, oruguitas, no se aguanten más, hay que crecer, aparte y volver, hacia adelante seguirás, vienen milagros, vienen crisalidas, hay que partir y construir su propio futuro. Dos oruguitas desorientadas en dos capullos, bien abrigadas, con sueños nuevos. Ya solo falta hacer lo necesario en el mundo que sigue cambiando, tumbando sus paredes. Ahí viene nuestro milagro. Ay, mariposas, no se aguanten más, hay que crecer, aparte y volver, hacia adelante seguirás, ya son milagros. Viendo crisalidas, hay que volar, hay que encontrar su propio futuro. Ay, mariposas, no se aguanten más, hay que crecer, aparte y volver, hacia adelante seguirás, ya son milagros. Rompiendo crisalidas, hay que volar, hay que encontrar su propio futuro. Ay, mariposas, no se aguanten más, hay que crecer, aparte y volver, hacia adelante seguirás, ya son milagros. Rompiendo crisalidas, hay que volar, hay que encontrar su propio futuro. Nueva, antes de que la espera desgaste años en mí. Estoy dispuesto a lo que quieras, no importa lo que sea, tú llámame a servir. Llévame donde los pueblos necesiten tus palabras, necesiten ganas de vivir. Donde falte la esperanza, donde falte la alegría, simplemente por no saber de ti. Te doy mi corazón sincero para gritar sin miedo tu grandeza, Señor. Tendré mis manos sin cansancio, tu historia entre mis labios y fuerza la oración. Llévame donde los pueblos necesiten tus palabras, necesiten ganas de vivir. Donde falte la esperanza, donde falte la alegría, simplemente por no saber de ti. Y así marcha iré cantando, por calles predicando, lo bello que es tu amor. Señor, tengo alma misionera, condúceme a la tierra que tenga sed de Dios. Llévame donde los pueblos necesiten tus palabras, necesiten ganas de vivir. Donde falte la esperanza, donde falte la alegría, simplemente por no saber de ti. Llévame donde los pueblos necesiten tus palabras, necesiten ganas de vivir. Donde falte la esperanza, donde falte la alegría, simplemente por no saber de ti. Simplemente por no saber de ti.
Good evening, everybody. Good evening. Welcome to the 2023 CST conference here at Notre Dame. And I want us to especially say muchas gracias, great thanks to Cora Primavera for sharing the gift of music with us to open our conference. So thank you. Thanks, Benito. Again, I'm Bill Purcell. I'm the Senior Associate Director for the Catholic Social Tradition at the Center for Social Concerns, and your host here for the 2023 Catholic Social Tradition Conference, Justice, Sown in Peace. We're celebrating the 60th anniversary, as it says up here, of Pachamenteris. It's also the 40th anniversary for the U.S. Bishop's Pastoral Letter on the Challenge of Peace, and it's the 40th anniversary of the Center for Social Concerns, which opened its doors in the spring of 1983 at the same time. Thanks. So right now, let us turn in prayer to Notre Dame's Vice President of Mission Engagement and Church Affairs, Father Austin Collins, CSC, who will guide us in a prayer this evening. Father Austin.
Thank you, Bill. Let us pray. Good, loving, and all-inclusive God, we come before you tonight thankful for so many gifts, especially your gift of justice. Send your Spirit upon us as we gather for this conference. May our hearts be set on fire and our minds made clear while we engage in discussions and relationships to build a more peaceful world. As we celebrate 60 years of Pachamenteris, 40 years of the Challenge of Peace, the 40th anniversary of the Center for Social Concerns, may this gathering be sparked in renewed wisdom and strengthened relationships. Let us ascend as people on the path of hope and action. We ask this all in the name of Jesus, the Prince of Peace, who lives and reigns with you in the Holy Spirit. Amen. I just want to say congratulations, and I hope everyone feels welcome and at home at Notre Dame, and especially if this is your first visit here. Welcome.
Thank you, Father Austin, for that spiritual guidance and welcome as we commence these few days together. In reading the signs of the times, we definitely are called to work in new ways for peace and justice, as well as to open guidance, call for guidance from the Holy Spirit and the vision of Pope Francis. Hopefully with this gathering, actually over the next few days of almost 300 practitioners and academics from around the world, we can strengthen relationships in our convening to create islands of hope against the despair of injustice in our communities. So we gather to learn, lead, and grow over the next few days in order to go back to our communities with effective strategies to create a more just and humane world. Before introducing tonight's keynote, Let me provide a few words of thanks. There's actually 13 different co-sponsors for this conference, and it could not occur without their support. If you look in your, when you register in your packet in the booklet, in the back of the listing of the 13, I especially want to recognize Catholic Relief Services, who are bringing a whole contingent from Ghana, and Catholic Charities USA for their support for this conference. I also want to thank my colleagues from the Center for Social Concerns who have assisted in implementing this biennial event and living out CST. For all those from this center, can you stand up? Anybody who works at the Center for Social Concerns, please stand up. And I also want to give a shout out to Paula Mulher. You probably all know her name, who works tirelessly on this gathering in order to make it run smoothly. So for Paula. And again, if there's anything you need while you're here, please see myself or Paula and let us know how we can assist you while you're here, again, to make sure you're enjoying yourself and running smoothly and get the support you need. And if you're looking for the free Wi-Fi for those guests, please go to ND Guest Network to log on to get that. And for social media sharing, please use hashtag CSTND2023. Again, it's hashtag CSTND2023. Please, any pictures that you have, if you can post those, or any highlights, especially when you break up into your different smaller groups. And just so you know, we are already planning for 2025 CST conference, which will focus on the 10th anniversary of Laudato Si and environmental justice. So we'll hope to see you back. It's so nice, again, to have us all back together. Again, it was okay 2 years ago doing online, but there's nothing like seeing your faces and enjoying each other's company again. So let me now introduce tonight's keynote speaker. So tonight we are blessed to have Dr. Michelle Becka, who comes all the way from the University of Würzburg in Germany, where she is a professor of Christian social ethics. She is also the former dean of her faculty. Dr. Becka studied theology for a doctorate in Tuebingen, Germany, and did a year in Cochabamba, Bolivia. We were just with the chair of the theology department, Tim Manavina. She said she's much more comfortable speaking Spanish than English, but I think her English is superb. I can't even speak English as well as she can, so. Her research focuses on social ethics, human rights, and Latin America. And she remains a member of the German Commission on Justice and Peace. Michelle is the editor of several journals and has served on the International Planning Committee of Catholic Theological Ethics in the world. She lives with her family near Frankfurt, Germany. And tonight she'll speak on defending human rights, untapped potentials. And so after Dr. Becka speaks, you'll see there's microphones on the side. And so we'll take questions from those two microphones afterwards. So please give a warm Notre Dame welcome to Dr. Michelle Becka.
Yeah, ladies and gentlemen, first of all, I would like to express my sincere gratitude. Dear Bill, dear prep team, I feel extremely honored and delighted to be invited to speak here. Thank you very much for the invitation, the kind introduction, and for organizing this Congress to everyone involved in one or another way. Thank you for your hospitality and helpfulness. And I have to say, you can see I'm not only not a native speaker, but my English is really modest, yeah? Sorry. And I apologize for that, and I hope for your generous understanding. And if you don't understand me, feel free to ask me. And my perspective, which I will present here, is a European or German one. And it could be different from an American perspective, but that can make an exciting exchange, I hope. And the PowerPoint presentation is not very sophisticated, but it is only to help you in the understanding of my presentation. Well, let's begin. It works. Nonsense upon stilts was a reaction of the English philosopher Jeremy Bentham in the 18th century to the idea of human rights as unalienable rights. He said that all people are equal in dignity and rights lacks any basis in reality and corresponds rather to the personal wishes of those who propagate the idea. And even today, human rights are often called into question. But this is a basic conviction of this contribution. They are not nonsense upon stilts, but rather the normative basis on which our societies are founded. The assumption of freedom and equality for all people. It is a human person with their dignity and their rights that has to be at the center. Quote, any well-regulated, any productive association of men in society demands acceptance of one fundamental principle, that each individual man is truly a person, says Pacem in Terris in number 5, or Gaudium et Spes in 25, the subject and the goal of all social institution is and must be the human person. In what follows now, I will be less concerned with the justification of human rights but given the many violations of human rights on the one hand and the theoretical criticism on the other hand, with the question of how human rights can be defended today and what the contribution of Catholic social ethics could be in this context. I will first briefly look at Pacem in Terris and highlight especially the relationship between human rights and the common good, because there are interesting shifts and because I'm particularly interested in the way we can understand individual rights today. This will be my focus. Then I briefly discuss the situation of human rights today by outlining 5 points of criticism. In part 3, I take up these 5 points again and try to show how they could be dealt with from the perspective of Christian social ethics. The thesis is that there is potential that we are not sufficiently exploiting yet. Well, you see, I can't do justice to these big questions in 35 minutes, but I have the advantage of giving the opening address. And so I allow myself a few more general thoughts in the certainty that they will be fleshed out, deepened, and further developed over the next few days. 60 years, Pacem in Terris. As you all know, Pacem in Terris is considered the basic document of the newer Catholic teaching of peace and a kind of human rights declaration of the Catholic Church. At the same time, the encyclical can be understood as a document of transition. The council document, Dignitatis Humanae, will accomplish the paradigm shift to the right of the person. In Pacem in Terris, this turning to the person is already discernible. It is an approximation of Christian ethics to the liberal, despite of the difficulty of the term, to the liberal idea of human rights and to the constitutional state. It follows to a long history of the Church struggles with human rights. The encyclical gets its special character from its basic personalistic approach. And it is striking that John 23 understands human rights as a product of general human and cultural historical development. The moral norms of personal dignity and rights are seen as accessible to reason. This gives meaning to the person, and at the same time, these human rights can become the moral basis for the orderly coexistence of all people. In the encyclical, the common good is embedded in human rights thinking in a remarkable way. The common good here consists of safeguarding the rights and duties of the individual. So there is a shift here too. The ordo idea is still dominant, but it is not understood here as superior to the individual, but, I quote, as a concrete ensemble of conditions and prerequisites that enable the individual to develop as a person in free interaction with others. That enable a person in free interaction with others, according to Eberhard Schockenhoff, a German theological ethicist. This is of great importance because the idea of the common good is central to Catholic social teaching and a significant contribution to our current social debates today because it opposes an exaggerated individualism focused on self-interest, but it is also a challenging concept. And there are at least two dangers, both of which go back to old conflicts led mainly between Dominicans and Jesuits in the 20th century. First, the danger of a kind of collectivism. This is that in defending against individualistic tendencies, a necessary normative individualism is also supposed or refused. The common good, however, serves the individual. The second danger, it's a bit hard danger, is to think we know exactly what the common good consists of, but who defines? There's also an old dispute about whether the common good should be understood a priori, before, or a posteriori. I'm convinced that it is always necessary to struggle anew and to negotiate socially what exactly the common good is. What society do we want to live in? And to me it seems Parliamentaris lays the groundwork for this understanding in both cases. Parliamentaris thus emphasizes the problematic concept of the common good, or the difficult concept of the common good, which must be taken up and continued. Moreover, the concept of the universal common good, today we call it global common good, is coined, which is, of course, subject to the same dangers and at the same time so important. My eclectic view to the encyclical also indicates a perspective from which I would now like to outline the challenges and how to deal with them. Challenged human rights. Human rights are often challenged, questioned, and criticized. There are isolated positions that fundamentally question their claim, positions that seriously doubt or deny that all people have equal dignity and rights. I do not deal with these positions here. I presuppose the claim of human rights to be justified and reasonable, and I don't deal with that yet here. But there are also inquiries and criticisms of various kinds that should be taken seriously and that point to deficits and real problems in our societies. I'm thinking, for example, of human rights in the area of migration, the lack of freedom rights worldwide, as well as of social rights. Thinking in the pandemics, for example. There would be a lot to say about these concrete problems, but I will take up 5 somewhat more general points. And I start with A, disregard for rights. My students sometimes say that the constant violation of human rights show that they make no sense. Nobody cares anyway. This reaction is understandable as an expression of disappointment, but it is problematic and not right. Because, undoubtedly, poor practice does not mean that the standard is wrong. If the norm is well-founded, and human rights are, it will not become wrong by poor practice. On the contrary, because we are convinced of the norm, we try to shape reality in accordance with this norm. The disregard for rights challenges us to defend human rights. That is my claim and my motivation. And we heard just now that, well, tomorrow is the Remembrance Day of Oscar Romero. And I think here the Christian spirit comes in the realm of God meditations of Oscar Romero. He says, we can't do everything, but we can't do something, and we can make it good, yes? And this is what we have to work for, to defend human rights. But back to my text. This does not mean that there is no problem, nor does it mean that the poor practice has no impact on the norm. It does, because the norm that is not respected becomes untrustworthy and, according to Jürgen Habermas, loses part of its legitimacy. Human rights lose credibility if they are not socially effective, if they are not enforced, and if the emancipatory claim of human rights is not visible. For the sake of the credibility of human rights, this criticism must be taken seriously. B, lost innocence. Post-colonial and decolonial theories have taught us that the discourse on human rights is not innocent. One of the basic assumptions of decolonialidad is that the structure of domination associated with colonialism permeate global relations, practices, and discourses to this day. This is also true for epistemologies and norms. I quote Rosilio Martinez, "In this sense, the Eurocentric human rights discourse was a component that has contributed to the coloniality of power, knowledge, and being. The ways in which it concretizes the understanding of human dignity and, in particular, the forms and mechanisms of its protection are ways of exercising coloniality." End of quote. Thus, the protection of human dignity, or more correctly, the discourse on it, is also permeated by coloniality. That is not irrelevant, because the ways in which it concretizes the understanding of human dignity relates to the basic understanding of human rights. Decolonial and postcolonial theories accuse human rights actors also of protecting others without knowing what they actually want or need. This means that the people it should be about and their practices are not seen or made invisible. It also means that they are not taken seriously as subjects. I am convinced that the decolonial criticism on human rights must be taken seriously, and at the same time, the claim of human rights must be defended. C, the individualism accusation. I quote, "None of the so-called rights of man, therefore, go beyond egoistic man. That is, an individual withdrawn into himself, into the confines of his private interests and private caprice, and separated from the community." We encounter this old accusation by Karl Marx from 1844 also many times today. Sabah Mahmoud, for example, criticizes human rights as apathetic to communal aspirations. Approaches from the Global South and others politically left also formulate this type of criticism. It is also referred to as the atomism accusation, which says human rights center on an isolated self that is asocial, so that solidarity and connectedness are either ignored or even destroyed. Paradoxically, this criticism is also formulated by the extreme right. But this critique is not primarily a critique of human rights, but of a specific form of liberalism in whose tradition human rights are placed, regardless of whether this exclusive localization is permissible. It is not. The understanding of freedom and individual itself must be prudent. Freedom is more than not bothering each other. And to say it with regard to the human rights, with Heiner Bielefeld, a colleague from Germany, I quote, rights held by individuals are not necessarily individualistic in sense on focusing on the isolated individual. Confusing rights held by individuals with an individualistic, unencumbered way of life has become the source of countless misunderstandings. Human rights are rights of human beings. This is sometimes considered too exclusive regarding animals or nature in general. These allegations are not new, but with the various discourses of the present about the Anthropocene, about rights of nature, post-humanism, and others, the accusation has become very topical again, and also in different way. For example, Dipesh Chakrabarty in The Climate of History in a Planetary Age asks, is the Anthropocene a critique of liberty rights? In other words, is our destructive impact on our planet a result of liberties, of freedom rights? Well, man-made destruction of the non-human world and climate change result from freedom used irresponsibly. It can be understood as a consequence of anthropocentrism that places humans detachedly above non-human nature, that has detached action from responsibility. I think that is no reason to question freedom and other rights, but it is reason to clarify our understanding. And the last one, danger of economic instrumentalization. The accusation of individualism is sometimes also economically narrowly defined, from liberalism to economic liberalism. Then the self-interest of the isolated subject is spelled out as economic interest. Then profit maximization appears as my right. Samuel Moyn and others criticize the companionship between human rights and market fundamentalism. This is sometimes associated with policies that speak of defending human rights, but at the heart of which are other interests, mainly economic. That is an instrumentalization of human rights, because it is not about the rights of all people, but about interests. The violation of human rights in the name of human rights have caused them almost irreparable harm. And I think it is hypocritical when powerful countries constantly talk about human rights but do not prevent third parties, especially economies, from ignoring them, or when they themselves even cover economic interests in other countries with their commitment to human rights. I have to admit, I do not have any solutions to the challenges outlined, but I would like to show a little bit how we could think ahead, and I will come back to the 5 points. A, disregard for rights and the sensitivity of suffering. The experience of disregard for rights is not new. It was this experience that led to the formulation of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. We also celebrate this year 75 years, this declaration. It can be understood in no other way than as a response to the Holocaust and the Second World War. Never again so much suffering and so much injustice. In my country, Germany, after all the crimes committed, it was crucial to mark this never again as clearly as possible. Human dignity is inviolable, says Article 1 of our Constitution. Of course it is touched and hurt day after day, everywhere. But that must not be under any circumstance. That is what the indicative wording is supposed to express. Yeah? If we say it should not be touched, would be too weak. Yeah? It is good that it is anchored so prominently, but it must be updated and implemented every day and everywhere. Human rights must not lose their anchoring in experience. Therefore, sensitivity for the suffering of those whose dignity has been violated, of those who have been deprived of their rights, must be the first step. The German theologian Johann Baptist Metz has shown the importance of the sensitivity to suffering with the word memoria passionis. He founds his theology on this. And Edward Schillebeeckx emphasizes the importance of experience also to our knowledge. Our theological knowledge and ethical thinking must not lose its connection to suffering experience, and experience in general, just as little as the discourse of human rights must not lose it. It is therefore good that in recent decades, Christian social ethics has been understood as a reflection theory of practice. Starting from the historical experience, we struggle to shape this practice in the right way towards more justice. And I think the shift begins in Pacem in Terris. This brings us very close to the second challenge, the lost innocence, context sensitivity, and emancipatory claim. A lot of suffering came from Europe due to colonialism, and we still suffer from the consequences today. And the injuries go very deep. This is not to be dismissed lightly. In conversations with many colleagues from the Global South, I often experience these doubts and also anger regarding the practice of human rights. But I also experience that the idea or the claim of human rights is not rejected. On the contrary, also thinkers like Gayatri Spivak, Boaventura Sousa Santos, and others, they are also concerned with recognizing the dignity of the human person. And this dignity unfolds in rights. Therefore, I am firmly convinced that this human rights claim must be defended as emancipatory, but without arrogance and with context sensitivity. Human rights discourse and human rights politics need contextualization. It must not serve to deepen the colonial divide. But this will only be prevented if paternalism is replaced by dialogue at eye level. And if no person is treated as an object of charity, of aid, or even of rights, but it is taken seriously as a subject of human rights, no matter where, no matter what skin color, religion, sexual orientation. This idea is also anchored in the Catholic tradition, the basic assumption that the human person is unique and valuable, that they are rational, a moral subject capable of shaping freedom and assuming responsibility, not to separate it. Yeah. However, there is still sometimes also a fear of freedom. And I think this is a wasted opportunity. See? The individualism accusation and relationality. I want to emphasize this aspect in particular. Human rights are rights of individuals. This is important. They are independent of social status, gender, marital status, or whatever. But, as already mentioned, the rights of the individual are not the same as individualistic rights. Human rights are held by individuals, but they are exercised together with others. They have a relational structure. We have learned over the past decades from feminist theory, from indigenous cultures, in the discourse on the Convention on Rights of Persons with Disabilities, and many more, that autonomy and freedom, on the one hand, and vulnerability and relationality, on the other hand, are not opposites. They belong together. In our autonomy, we are also vulnerable, all without exception. We are limited in our exercise of freedom. We shape our freedom with others. That can be a restriction, but it also opens up the scope for action. The amazing thing is that insight is not all new to us as theologians, because our tradition highlights the social dimension of the human being. Being free and being social belong together. And relationality is not secondary, but is inscribed in the rational self. This is eminently compatible with current debates, also concerning de- and post-colonial questions. And I sometimes wonder why we, but also the church magisterium, do not strengthen this argument more, that freedom and relationality belong together. We could highlight this in the public discourses of our societies. It could help to overcome false dichotomies, also with regard to the common good, what I mentioned before. Pope Francis, for example, rightly criticizes in Fratelli Tutti misinterpretations of freedom and freedom rights. But I think it falls a little bit too short in promoting a different understanding of freedom, which we do have already. No? The anthropocentrism accusation and an extended relationality. With Laudato Si, a step was taken in the magisterial proclamation that had long been prepared in Christian social ethics, the expansion of the human sphere of responsibility from the social level to the non-human world, a step of great significance. Today, we are discussing whether this extension is sufficient and whether we are not still thinking too much from the human point of view. Now it can be objected that we cannot help but think in terms of human beings, which is of course correct, yes? But of course what is meant is whether we value nature, difficult term, and climate too much solely in terms of their value and benefits for us. Do they not have value in themselves or have their own needs? This touches the discussion about rights of nature. Do we draw the line between ourselves and what we call nature too sharply, we and the nature? This affects the debate in the context of post-humanism, such as Bruno Latour, but also indigenous traditions. At the moment, in German-speaking social ethics, the position of Latour and others is being taken up and discussed quite sympathetically. On the other hand, the discourse on the rights of nature is viewed rather critically. This has to do with the status of a legal subject. And there would indeed be a lot to be clarified. Nevertheless, I think this discussion should be held. There's a lot to do. However, I maintain here again, we have potential in our tradition, for example, in theologies of creation, that should be taken up and developed further. The German social ethicist Hayo Höhn coined the term, it's difficult now in English, anthroporelationalidad, but it is there. Yeah, you can find it. Difficult. Well, this means the human person is a subject of responsibility, but that does not put them above everything else. Rather, they are networked. We are embedded not only in a network of interpersonal relationships and structures, but also in connection with the non-human world. Relationality is thus extended beyond the interpersonal realm. Even in the non-human world, we are not isolated. This becomes especially clear in the context of climate change now. Because what is at stake here is the atmosphere, that is the space we inhabit together. Pope Francis therefore speaks of the common home, and he rightly warns against playing off the social dimension against the ecological one. Human rights are therefore to be defended, not against, but with claims to protect the non-human world. And the last, the danger of instrumentalization, strong institutions. The last point brings us back to the first, the disregard of rights, because both the disregard for rights and the instrumentalization must be countered by strong institutions. Institutions protect the exercise of freedom and guarantee equity. They allow human flourishing, and human flourishing needs freedom rights and social rights. You cannot separate them. The exercise of freedom requires also material foundation. And if the wealth gap is too big, it's difficult to realize human rights. Governance structures are needed that guarantee people their rights and help them to assert them. In this respect, Jeremy Bentham was right when he said that there are no rights without law. Human rights need to be better enshrined. These structures are needed at all levels. Locally, because needs can be identified and experiences can be recorded on site. Nationally and in state associations, because we have democratically legitimized structures here in which power is also controlled. And internationally, because human rights issues are not tied to citizenship, and because the problems transcend national borders. We have these structures, but they have deficits. The most difficult is at the international level. That is why we also need civil society engagement, which repeatedly reminds, admonishes, demands, and accuses, but also mediates and reduces polarization. Academic theology and the church also have an important role to play in these processes. I will conclude. Just a quick note. I have picked out only a few aspects from Pacem et Terris. I did not say anything about the ethical issues of peace, but I consider human rights considerations to be the basis of peace. The title of this conference is Justice, Zone, in Peace. And that's right, and that is very important. But the reverse is also true. Peace is sown in justice. In the year 2000, the German bishops published a magnificent document entitled Just Peace. It says in section 59, I quote, "The guiding principle of just peace is ultimately based on a very simple insight. A world in which most people are deprived of what constitutes a decent life is not sustainable. It is full of violence even when there is no war. Conditions of persistent, severe injustice are inherently violent and prone to violence. It follows positively, justice creates peace." End of the quote. Peace, which we so urgently need in our time, presupposes justice. The human rights triad, respect, protect, fulfill human rights, is a central component of this justice. Thank you for your attention.
I want to thank Michelle, who got us about a semester's worth of information, and I love her structure. It's easy to write notes. And again, one thing too is we will also make sure that any kind of presentation will be available for folks, so we'll make sure that you have that and supplement your notes. But we've opened up the 2 microphones on the side, so we want to open up to any questions for Michelle, Becka that may have. Sure.
Hi, Michelle. Thank you for your presentation. It was really interesting. I have a question. I think that universalism is one of the main critiques to the human rights policy, and how it's difficult to apply this whole moral ideas even to cultures or societies that don't share the same principles as most of the Western societies. I would say that is like the most marked difference. So under this premise, I think that as church, we're trying here to promote something that at the end of the day, we don't believe, or at least we can't apply. These principles of dignity, equality, no discriminations, and all these statements that ground human rights are not applied in our church. We have second category participants in our church as women or non-hegemonic sexual identities. Those individuals are limited in their action, the access to power, the participation, and at the end of the day, the equality in church. So considering this whole universalism idea, what do you think could be the obstacle for us as Catholic Church to apply this whole human rights concepts that sometimes we critique that other societies don't apply? And if you think that identifying this obstacle could be a turning point and a help to understand how this whole human rights idea could be more useful or applicable in a universal way.
Okay, thank you for your question.
Sorry.
How many time do I have? I think you raised 2 very, very important questions. The first is a question we have been discussing for many, many years, and it's quite complicated. We would need much more time. We have the critique, the universalistic critique in these times in the post-colonial and decolonial critiques. Therefore, I mentioned it, yes. And therefore, I said, I think often they don't criticize the idea, because the idea is that every person is equal, that every person should have rights. And if I start talking with people, almost everyone agrees. And sometimes the critique is also expressed by the powerful of countries of the global south. And we have to listen very exactly who expresses the criticism. The people who are really oppressed and who are often also fighting for their rights, or the powerful governing them who don't want them to have rights. Yes. Therefore, it is important to create a solidarity between different networks worldwide who claim for their rights, but then also listen, what do you mean by human rights? And we have a lot of approaches. I think in Sheila Ben Habib, she, for example, explains that, okay, we have a canon of human rights, but how we unfold it, how we exercise it, can differ in different contexts, yes? And I think we are much more closer than we think, that no one should suffer, no one should be forbidden to speak. But, well, it's complicated, we should say more about this, but I won't do this now. And the other question, yes, it's important and it's a big question, and my students also ask. And I think we have a huge problem of credibility in our church at the moment, knowing that at the one hand, the church is an important, really important advocate of human rights and defending human rights. We were talking about Latin America, wherever. But on the other hand, there's a problem with human rights within the church. And it is quite interesting. I mentioned before Dignitatis Humanae. And if you read the documents of the, not only the council documents, but the preparing papers and everything, there was a discussion if there should be human rights within the church, yeah, and it was denied. But this is a long time ago, and I think it is time to talk again about this, because if we don't do that, we will lose, or we have already lost credibility, yeah. And I can't explain what are the ethical reasons not to do this. From an ethical point of view, from human rights point of view, I would say yes, we need to act here. Of course, of view of systematic theology, it would be different, yes. And when we have to there we have to discuss. But I think we are in this, and we have to go ahead with this. Yeah, we need to act and not only to react.
Sure.
Thank you for the question.
Can we make sure you introduce yourself so folks can know who you are?
Sure. Thanks so much for your presentation. My name is Patrick Flanagan. I teach St. John's University in New York. My question has to do with Uganda. So you recognize that Uganda just legislated the castration of any pedophile, as well as acknowledging the fact that there are no LGBTQIA folks in that country. I guess trying to understand your argument, where are we to make the move to respond to that without being neo-colonialist?
Yeah.
We brought you here for the easy questions.
So yes, it's a difficult question. Yeah.
Difficult question, because again, it's one of these things that I struggle with.
Yeah.
Who are we to say that we're more advanced than other places?
No, we are not. But the problem is that we had a congress in Kenya, Nairobi, last year, and all these questions were raised. And there were a lot of Pakpan Congress, a lot of priests and non-theologians, people from the pastoral care, and they were also concerned about it. And I think this is the point. The people who live there, they are also concerned, and they want to act. And when I get here to the United States on Monday, I met a colleague from Nigeria, and he told me, we are struggling a lot and we need your solidarity. And I think it's about solidarity. It's not about, I knew what's the right thing for you, yes? But it is about listening and trying to understand where we can help each other. And therefore I mentioned also Gayatri Spivak, because what she says is that too often human rights activists know already what is the best thing, and they don't even go to where the people live. Yeah, and we shouldn't do that. Yeah, but perhaps this is also a possibility of the networks we have in theology, in our church. We know people elsewhere, and we can talk together. We have a starting point. And I think it's important to have a starting point. Yeah, we don't have to agree in everything, but we have a starting point, and then we can try to act together. I understand solidarity not in terms of identity, but in terms of act together. We want to reach something. We want to reach more justice. Yeah, and therefore we create not only one circle of solidarity, but it's a network. Yeah, we have many solidarities in plural. This is not an answer, but I know that people need to speak with us about these things, and that they need our solidarity, because I think it would also be a neo-colonial to say, doesn't matter to me. Yeah, it's your thing. It's not my concern. It is my concern, because, and that we learned of decolonial and post-colonial theory, what we have today has its roots in the past, and therefore we have also certain responsibility. And it's too easy to say, it's not my concern, yeah? But how to act without arrogance in the concrete case is really, really difficult. And I have to admit, for me, it is also sometimes very hard. I love to be on board of the theological journal Concilium. We are 20 people of 17, 18 countries, and we are deciding together via consensus, and it's great, but I'm learning a lot, and I think the most important thing is that we have to admit that we all have to learn, yeah? And then perhaps we can avoid arrogance.
Thank you very much. My name is Michael Jesuak. My question concerns the relationship between human rights and religious practice, and specifically in liberal democracies here, Christianity and Christian practice. So the language of human rights has largely been taken up in Western liberal democracies, and I'm grateful for that, obviously, but it also corresponds to a time where we're seeing Christianity, Christian practice, Christian belief, and the strength of Christian institutions decline. I'm wondering if you could comment on how the decline in Christian practice and institutional authority might impact the durability of the concept of human rights on a
Oh, I think I
longer
didn't
time.
understand very well the question. How the decline of Christian institutions did what?
Christian institutions, a Christian belief, Christian practice, how the decline of Christianity may impact the long-term durability of human rights on a world historical scale almost.
I don't know that. I don't know.
I guess could you comment on the linkage historically between Christianity and this concept of human rights? Does it have purchase in other sort of worldview, philosophy, kind of religious systems that
Perhaps I have a little bit of problem that sometimes we do like if human rights something very Christian. Yeah. Well, the history in the United States and in Europe was quite different with the acceptance of the human right. It was easier here. I don't know very much about the history here, but it was easier here because the relationship between human rights and religion was there was a relationship. And in Europe, after the French Revolution, it was quite difficult, yes, because it is too complicated to try to explain, and my English is not enough for that, what happened in the late 18th, but especially 19th century in Europe between the human rights tradition and the church, but there was no acceptance at all of the human rights. Yeah, and it was, you know, the encyclicals of the popes and whatever. And in Germany, it was quite even more complicated. This is one thing, that it is not a Christian tradition. And the question we have is, of course, we have some of the ideas of human dignity in our tradition, but it took a long time that this idea corresponded, of dignity corresponded to rights, that we have to respect each other with, as a person, as a subject of rights. Therefore, I'm perhaps struggling a little bit with your question. But perhaps I didn't get it very well, and we can talk on later.
Michelle, we're going to go to this side first, and then we'll go back to the other side, so we do a little ping pong.
Thank you very much, Dr. Becka. I'm James O'Sullivan of St. Joseph's University in Philadelphia. And I'm wondering, you touched upon this, I think, this particular problem in several, it would relate to several of the different challenges that you named. But that is the state, and I think you briefly mentioned this, the state of the notion of social and economic rights at all, especially since the 80s and 90s, the rise of new types of neoliberalism that would challenge that idea, and in fact did, even some politicians. And the importance to the whole idea, especially in the UDHR tradition, of interdependency, and what you think that the potential for, and even further indivisibility, and what you think the importance of going forward, those notions for preventing a further bifurcation of rights, as such that, you know, only civil and political rights are real rights, and then we have social and economic rights that aren't really as important, or that they're not really rights. So if you could just briefly comment on what you think the potential there would be.
Yeah. Well, of course, in the Human Rights Declaration, it says you can't separate the civil rights and the socio-economical rights. But then we have two conventions on human rights, and we all know it is because of the historical situation in the Cold War. Yes, it was not possible to agree on one convention. But we all know this is not the ideal situation, and I think what the Declaration of Human Rights said and what they were discussing before the declaration, it is so important. For example, I appreciate very much the scriptures of Amartya Sen, and he explains that the realization of freedom needs social justice. Yeah, how can I really realize my liberty rights? I never know if it is liberty or freedom, but you understand, yes? Without having nothing to eat or without knowing where to sleep or whatever. And therefore, it is necessary that they belong together. And we learned this very heavy in the last year during the pandemics. With the Justice Peace Commission in Germany, we worked on the global divide and justice in access to Impfstoff? Vaccines, yeah. To vaccines. And we all know that there is a right to health, yes? And in the general comment on the right to health, it says that because it's more complicated with social and economic rights, yeah, when are they fulfilled? It's much more difficult to decide, yeah? But in the general comment, it says that the international community is responsible, not only the state, not only the government, because we know first responsible to realize the human rights is the state, the national state, the government, yeah? But in the social and cultural and economic rights, it says in the general comments, also the international community. And we tried it with COVAX. But then, when we had not enough vaccines, well, there was a competition, and we forgot about the right. And we tried to, we wrote a paper on this, and it was very interesting that we were, after that, invited by the World Health Organization of Europe, because they said, yes, this topic will be less important after the pandemic, and now we experience exactly that. No one cares about it anymore, yeah? And we need partners. We need partners to realize it in the different regions. And we are interested in you, the church, as a partner, and this was new, because in development issues during many decades, they didn't want to touch anything with religion or church, yeah? We are interested in you because you have people everywhere. You have local communities and you know their needs, yeah? And I think it is time to reconnect social and liberty rights. We started during the pandemics, but now it is the same as before the pandemics, and I think we need more impact here.
Yeah, thank you very much.
We'll take 3 more before we wrap it up.
Thank you very much for your excellent presentation. Richard Miller, I'm in the theology department at Creighton University. So I just wanted to ask about looking at the human rights UN documents on the rights of the child, also human rights resolutions on climate change and the environment. They speak of principles or rights of information. So not the young people need to have information about the risks from climate change. And so I wondered, in your deep knowledge and the circles you run in, is there much more discussion regarding that, the rights of information? So for instance, in this country, we have people lying all the time. We have the politicians, the news networks. We have distortions of truth, scapegoating, and you now have big tech companies that'll just run lies for profit. And I just wanted to see if that was a seriously in a highly information world, if that was under serious discussion.
Yeah, thank you. I can't talk about the situation in the United States. I can't. Yeah, I don't know it well enough, but I think it's quite similar to Europe in some kinds. It is very important because when they wrote the declaration or pronounced the Declaration of Human Rights, they thought, or they were in a situation and they feared that there would be not enough information. And we today live in a situation where there is so much information. And the problem is, on the one hand, completely different, yeah, because now we have to decide what is the important or the right information. But it is extremely important to put more attention to this. And I think we have also a human right to human right formation. Yeah, and this needs information, this needs formation. And I ask myself, where are we now and what should we do? For example, some weeks ago we had conference on ethics and artificial intelligence, and what about ChatGPT and all these things. And I was talking about that with my family. Yeah? And my younger son told me, you know, I like to watch political videos on YouTube, Instagram, TikTok, whatever. Yeah, a normal 15-year-old boy. And he told me, you know, I watched 2 times a clip of a German right-wing party, and now I receive everything from them. Yeah? And it is not bad made, he told me. If we would not talk in our dinner together in a completely different way, I would find it very interesting and perhaps convincing. And I was getting very nervous. What are we doing with this? Yeah, how can we? You can't control it, but how do we prepare also our students and those who will teach in high schools and in schools to deal with information, to have a critical capacity to think and consciousness? I'm really, really concerned about that. And I don't know how we can do it, but we have to do something, and very quickly, yeah, on the human rights issues, but also on other issues. It is a huge danger for our democracies. And I introduced human rights as the base of our democracies, and it is in danger in many ways. Yeah, but how to do it? You also need the technical knowledge. I don't have it. I don't know how to do it. Yes, but we should work together. Those with the technical knowledge and ethicists, and we should do something, and urgently. Sorry, I have no answer.
Maybe we can take the last 2 questions together, so she can ask both.
Mm-hmm.
Father Ashley.
Thank you. Ashley Beck, St Mary's University, England. Quite a few years ago, in his study Torture and Eucharist, William Kavanagh pointed out that a problem with human rights theory is if those who commit crimes don't regard their victims as human. I think he was drawing a bit on Alistair McIntyre. How do we respond to that issue? Because I suspect it's lying behind much of what's going on in Ukraine in terms of human rights violations.
Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Becka, for your presentation. My name is Edgar Antonio Lopez. I'm from Colombia. I teach theology at Pontificia Universidad Javeriana. And it was very interesting that you have quoted some British philosophers of the utilitarian tradition, because coming from Germany, I would expect that you have quoted Immanuel Kant, the Prussian philosopher. But I'm very happy because reading utilitarianism authors, I started to think about my Kantian formation on ethics. And my question is about the anthropocentrism of the reflection on human rights. As Pope Francis in Laudato Si said, the members of other species are also end in themselves. And I think that he's right. And the point is that if it is true that the members of other species are different of the human kind, are end in themselves, we should think seriously in the Universal Declaration of the Rights of Animals of 1978. So Pope Francis said in that encyclica that everything is connected, and I think it's an invitation to abandon the anthropocentric model and go to the relationship model. So don't you think that we should promote more the Universal Declaration of the Rights of the Animals, that stands that animals can have the right to live, to stay alive, to live in freedom, and to be freed of the pain that we humans cause on them? Thank you.
Thank you. First, to your question, it is it is the main problem we have with the human rights, and the idea of the Human Rights Declaration was to prevent this, but it did not work. Yeah, we have the same problem today, but what we have perhaps is that now, you mentioned the war in the Ukraine, that Putin is accused and at the in Den Haag at the court. ICC. Okay, it's easier. Yes, and this is something very important. I think in situations of conflict, if someone does not want to understand, we can't do so much, but therefore we need institutions which try to establish the law again. Because what would be the alternative? Then we would reach to Richard Rorty. He says, okay, it does not work with it's by rationality we can't deal the problem, and then for him there keeps irony and solidarity. Yes, solidarity we need, yes, but it's, for me, it's a bit cynical to stop the argumentation. We won't convince Putin, I guess, yeah? But we can try to hold on to a system of rights that not the stronger one can do what he wants. Yeah. But a person who don't want to understand, what can we do? And this is what also we had in the question with information. What I'm wondering today as an ethicist, if arguing does not work, what do we have? Yes, it is questioning myself very, very deeply. I hold on to arguing, but we see everywhere we are very, very limited. But we have to go on. What is the alternative? Yes, and the other question is huge. I'm just in the very beginning in trying to connect the human rights discourse with the discussion on rights of nature and also posthumanism. Well, the problem for me is that anthropocentrism sometimes is used in a very general way. What kind of anthropocentrism are we referring to? I think it is important that we as human beings have a special responsibility. Yeah, this is also a kind of anthropocentrism. I put me in a special position thinking that I have a responsibility. And if we make laws, we are deciding we can't get out of certain anthropocentrism. And therefore, many of my colleagues in Germany think, no, we should not think more about this. But I think it's too easy, yeah? Therefore, I'm a little bit not divided, but still searching, perhaps. A declaration of animal rights, I think not yet. Yeah, it is very interesting what happens in these countries where we already have rights of nature. For example, in Bolivia, yes, of course there raise conflicts. What is if there is a right of nature and there is a national park, and nature has rights in the constitution, but people have also rights. And when the people now want to build a street through the national park, who decides whose rights are more important? Yes? How we can get out of this? I think there's a lot to do, a lot to think about it, but we have to think about it. This kind of anthropocentrism that we have today and we had in the past does not work anymore. Yeah? We have to think more in connectedness. In this sense, I agree. But what this means exactly in terms of laws, it is more difficult, yeah? But there are discussions and there are ways, and we have to go on. I know it not well in us, but I think it is important to study it and to work on it and to deepen the understanding of what relationality really means. Thank you.
Again, thank you, Michelle. Thank you again for the a great, this rich evening. Just a couple updates. Again, just want to let folks know that, so 8 o'clock tomorrow is when breakfast will be available. Again, our next keynote will be at 9 a.m., where Marie Dennis, who joined us, will speak on gospel nonviolence. She's here from Pax Christi International, so that'll be the keynote. And then we'll move to the different areas and breakout groups for a while. And then the next main keynote then will be at 4 o'clock tomorrow. We'll have one on higher education. And so there'll be a number of folks on that. And again, I just want to remind folks, then there's a contingent of folks that are coming from Ghana, and they will actually speak here on Saturday morning at 10 o'clock also. But again, Sister Helen will be tomorrow night at 8 o'clock, and then also here in this room. So the keynotes will all be here, and everything will be in this building. Again, if you need anything, please let me know. Let Paula know. But again, we just want to make sure that you know your way around. Just so you know, if you go across the street where the Morris Inn is, Roars, there is actually a bar in there. So if you want to go decompress and talk about all the things we just learned this evening, I would encourage you to come over and we can discuss it over there. So again, thank you. Have a great evening and get some good sleep.